I stood on my own front porch with one arm left and realized they looked right through me, like I didn't exist. That's the moment I understood the difference between being unwanted and being invisible. Unwanted means they see you but don't want you around. Invisible means they look right through you like you're made of air. I'd just spent 18 hours flying from Ramstein Air Base back to Virginia Beach. Left arm gone from the elbow down, Purple Heart pinned to my dress uniform, and enough Afghanistan dust in my duffel bag to plant a garden. I didn't call ahead. Maybe I wanted it to be a surprise. Maybe I just wanted to feel like I belonged somewhere again. Through the living room window, I could see my entire family. My parents, my brother Jake, even family friends I recognized from childhood barbecues. Champagne glasses catching the light from my mother's precious crystal chandelier. Laughter floating out like they were celebrating something important. I knocked on the door once, twice. The celebration continued like I wasn't there. I pressed the doorbell, that ridiculous America the Beautiful chime my mother installed after 9/11 to show our patriotism. Still nothing. Finally, I knocked harder. The door opened and Jake appeared, wine glass in hand, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my military pay for 3 months. When he saw me standing there, his face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, then something that looked like mild annoyance. "Sarah?" he said, like he was trying to place where he knew me from. Did you say you were coming home?" Coming home. Like I was a college friend dropping by unannounced. "I just got back from Afghanistan," I said, shifting my duffel bag on my shoulder. The weight felt heavier than it should have. Thought the family might want to know I'm alive. Jake glanced back into the house where the celebration was still going strong, then back at me. I watched him calculate something in his head, probably how my presence would affect whatever they were celebrating. "Oh," he said, That's great, Sarah." "Really? But we're kind of in the middle of something important right now." Important. I looked past him into the living room where I'd grown up, where I'd done homework at that coffee table, where I'd watched Saturday morning cartoons on that couch, where I'd announced my decision to join the army 8 years ago. That's when my mother appeared behind Jake, champagne flute in her perfectly manicured hand. She was dressed like she was hosting a dinner party, which apparently she was. "Sarah," she said, with the same tone she'd use for the mailman, pleasant but distant. "Honey, you didn't tell us you were coming." I stared at her for a moment, my own mother, looking at me like I was an unexpected guest who'd shown up at an inconvenient time. "I was in a military hospital for 2 months," I said quietly. "Lost my arm saving another soldier's life. I thought you might want to see that I'm okay." From inside the house, my father's voice boomed over the conversation. "Jake is everything I could ask for in a son. First million before 30, just like his old man." The room erupted in applause and congratulatory voices. My brother, the golden child, was being celebrated while I stood on the doorstep like a stranger. My mother glanced nervously back toward the party, then at me. "Sweetheart, this really isn't the best time. Could you maybe call tomorrow? We could have lunch or something." Call tomorrow. Schedule an appointment to see my own family. "Who's at the door?" my father called from inside. Jake looked at me, then back toward the house. "Nobody important, Dad. Just someone collecting for charity. Nobody important." Those words hit harder than any IED blast. I'd taken shrapnel in 3 different places, saving Tank's life. I'd learned to tie my boots with one hand. I'd spent 67 days in physical therapy learning to write left-handed. And to my own family, I was nobody important. I should go, I said, taking a step back. That's probably best, Jake said, already starting to close the door. We'll talk soon, okay? The door closed with a soft click, and I stood there in the Virginia evening air, listening to the celebration continue inside. They didn't skip a beat. The party went on like nothing had happened, like I'd never been there at all. I walked back to my rental car, a compact economy model that was all I could afford on my disability check, and sat in the driver's seat for a long time. My hand was shaking. Not from trauma or phantom pain from my missing arm, but from the realization that I'd been fooling myself for 28 years. In Afghanistan, when I dragged Tank out of that wreckage under enemy fire, losing my arm in the process, he looked at me and said, "Ma'am, you saved my life. I'll never forget what you did." The medics who loaded me onto the helicopter saw a hero. The doctors who operated on me saw a soldier who'd sacrificed for her country. My fellow service members saw someone worth risking their own lives to visit in the hospital. But my own family? They saw nothing. Less than nothing. They saw an interruption. I started the car and drove away from the house where I'd grown up, past the neighborhood where I'd learned to ride a bike, past the elementary school where I'd first dreamed of making my parents proud. And for the first time since losing my arm, I felt truly disabled. Not because of what was missing from my body, but because of what was missing from my family. But as I drove through the familiar streets of my childhood, something else started to form in my mind. A memory of the people who had seen me, really seen me, when it mattered most. Tank, who called me ma'am with genuine respect. Chen, who flew 8 hours just to sit by my hospital bed. Doc, who made sure I never felt alone during the worst pain of my life. They weren't my blood relatives, but they'd acted more like family than my actual family ever had. Maybe I'd been looking for visibility in all the wrong places, but I was about to discover that being invisible to my family was just the beginning of how little I mattered to them. I wasn't always invisible to my family. I had to earn that. Let me take you back to understand how someone becomes a ghost in their own home. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow fade, like a photograph left in the sun too long until one day you realize you can barely make out the image anymore. I was 8 when I first noticed the pattern. Jake had just failed his 3rd grade spelling test. Again. And my parents spent the entire evening at the kitchen table helping him study. I'd gotten a perfect score on my math test that same day. When I showed them, my father glanced up for exactly 3 seconds and said, "That's nice, honey," before turning back to Jake's homework. That night, I heard them talking in their bedroom. "We need to make sure Jake doesn't fall behind," my mother whispered. "He's going to need all the help he can get." Nobody ever worried about me falling behind. I was expected to succeed. Jake was helped to succeed. There's a difference. High school graduation. I was valedictorian. Jake barely passed. At the ceremony, they applauded politely when my name was called, took a quick photo, then spent the rest of the reception introducing Jake to their friends as our son who's going to business school. When people asked about me, they'd say, "Oh, Sarah's always been independent. She'll figure it out." Independent. That was their word for invisible. College. I earned a full academic scholarship to Virginia Tech. Jake got into a private school that cost $40,000 a year. Guess whose education they bragged about at dinner parties? Jake's getting such a well-rounded experience at his university. The networking opportunities are incredible. When I called home with news about making Dean's List, the conversation lasted exactly 90 seconds before my mother said, "That's wonderful, dear." "Oh, your father's calling. We need to discuss Jake's spring break plans." But the military changed everything. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. At basic training, Drill Sergeant Williams saw something in me that my family never had. "Mitchell," he'd bark, "you've got natural leadership. Stop hiding it." During field exercises, when other recruits looked to me for guidance, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Being seen. Really seen. In Afghanistan, Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. I was the officer who soldiers trusted with their lives. When I walked into a room, conversations didn't continue around me. They stopped, and people listened. The day I lost my arm changed everything again, but not the way you'd think. March 15th, 2019. We were escorting medical supplies to a village outside Kandahar. The IED that flipped our Humvee didn't care about my family's opinion of me. Tank, trapped under 2,000 pounds of twisted metal with his femoral artery pumping blood into the Afghan sand, didn't see me as invisible. He saw me as his only chance to live. I pulled him out with one good arm while taking fire from 3 directions. When the shrapnel from the explosion took my left arm, I kept pressure on his wound with my right hand and returned fire with, well, I figured out how to make it work. Tank lived. I didn't die. According to every measure that mattered in that moment, it was a success. The Army saw a hero. My fellow soldiers saw sacrifice and courage. The doctors saw someone who'd given everything for her country and her brothers in arms. My family saw an inconvenience. The first call I could make from my hospital bed in Germany went to my parents. After 36 hours of surgery and 3 days in intensive care, I finally felt strong enough to dial home. "Hi, Mom. It's Sarah." "Oh, Sarah. How are you, honey?" "I'm in a military hospital in Germany. I was injured in Afghanistan. I lost my arm, but I'm alive, and I wanted you to know." "Oh my goodness! That's terrible! Are you okay? Do you need anything?" For a moment, I thought she actually cared. Then she continued, "Because we're right in the middle of Jake's promotion celebration. He just made regional manager. Can you believe it? 28 years old and already climbing the corporate ladder. We're so proud. Listen, can I call you back? The whole family's here and we're about to cut the cake." I lay in that hospital bed, missing an arm, surrounded by machines keeping track of my vital signs, and listened to celebration noises in the background of my own family's phone call. "Sure, Mom. Call me back when it's convenient." She never called back. The cards started arriving a week later. Not phone calls, cards. Like I was a distant relative they felt obligated to acknowledge. "Hope you feel better soon," and "Thinking of you," in my mother's perfect handwriting. Jake sent a text. "Sorry about your arm. That sucks. That sucks." 2 words for losing a limb in service to my country. But my military family? They moved heaven and earth to be there. Tank, still on crutches from his own injuries, flew to Germany on his own dime to sit by my bed. "Ma'am," he said, "you saved my life. I'm not going anywhere until you're back on your feet." Chen took leave and flew 8 hours from Kabul just to make sure I wasn't alone during my worst nightmares. Doc called every single day from wherever the Army had stationed him next, just to check on my progress. They saw me. They valued me. They made me feel like I mattered. When I finally flew back to the States for rehabilitation at Walter Reed, I expected something. Maybe my parents visiting. Maybe my brother taking a weekend off work. Maybe my family showing the same level of concern that Tank's family had shown for me. A woman they'd never met who'd saved their son's life. Instead, I got updates about Jake's new car, my mother's book club, and my father's golf handicap. 3 months into my rehab, I realized something that should have been obvious. I'd spent my entire life trying to become visible to people who were determined not to see me. But I was about to discover that my invisibility to them was more useful than I'd ever imagined. Because when you're invisible to your family, they think they can get away with anything. When you're invisible to your family, they forget you have eyes and ears. 3 months after my family treated me like a door-to-door salesman on their front porch, I finally understood why being invisible could be a superpower. Invisible people see everything, and what I was about to see would change everything. I was visiting my grandparents. Grandpa Thomas and Grandma Margaret were the only people in my bloodline who'd ever made me feel visible. Grandpa was a World War II veteran who understood what it meant to serve. Grandma had been a military nurse. They got it in a way my parents never would. Their small house in Norfolk always smelled like coffee and Old Spice aftershave. The walls were covered with military photos. Grandpa in his Army uniform from 1943, me in my dress blues from officer candidate school. Even a picture of my father from his brief stint in the National Guard, before he discovered that business school was more comfortable than boot camp. "How are you adjusting, sweetheart?" Grandma asked as she poured coffee into mugs that said, "Army Strong" and "World's Best Grandpa." "I'm learning," I said, demonstrating how I could now tie my shoes with one hand. "Physical therapy is going well. The prosthetic helps." Grandpa nodded approvingly. "You're tougher than most people twice your age. Always have been." That's when I noticed Grandma fidgeting with her coffee mug. She kept glancing at Grandpa like she wanted to say something but didn't know how. "Sarah," she finally said, her voice shaky, "there's something we need to tell you about." She disappeared into the kitchen and came back with a manila folder stuffed with papers. Her hands were trembling as she set it on the coffee table. "Do you know anything about a loan?" she asked. I looked at the papers. Bank documents, loan agreements. $47,000. My stomach dropped. "What kind of loan?" Grandpa leaned forward in his recliner, suddenly looking older than his 86 years. "Jake came to us in April, said he had an investment opportunity, a startup company that needed capital, promised he could double our money in 6 months. April. I was unconscious in a German hospital in April. He said the whole family had discussed it," Grandma continued. "Said you were especially supportive because you understood business from your time managing logistics in the Army." My blood went cold. He said I was supportive? "He had all these documents," Grandpa said, pulling out a folder thick with official-looking papers. "Business plans, financial projections. Said you'd reviewed everything and given it your blessing." I stared at the loan agreement. Signed April 20th, 2019. 3 days after I'd lost my arm. While I was sedated and having reconstructive surgery, Jake was using my name to convince my grandparents to hand over their life savings. Did you try to contact me about this?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Grandma's eyes filled with tears. "Jake said you were deployed and couldn't be reached, but that you'd discussed it before you left. He said you told him it was a smart investment and that they should trust him." "He seemed so confident," Grandpa added, "and he kept talking about how proud you'd be when we doubled our money, how you'd always looked out for the family's financial future." I felt like I was going to be sick. Not only had I been invisible to my family, I'd been so invisible that Jake felt comfortable using my identity without permission. He'd gambled with my reputation and my grandparents' trust, knowing I was half a world away and unable to defend myself. "Where's the money now?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Gone," Grandpa said quietly. "The company folded after 2 months. Jake said it was market conditions, that these things happen in business. He promised he'd pay us back, but he hasn't." "He says he's working on it," Grandma said. "Says he just needs time to get back on his feet." I looked around their small living room. The furniture was older than I remembered. The carpet was worn. There was a stack of medical bills on the side table next to Grandpa's chair. Bills for his heart medication, Grandma's diabetes treatments. "Are you okay financially?" I asked. Grandma and Grandpa exchanged a look that told me everything. "We're managing," Grandpa said, with the stubborn pride of a man who'd survived the Great Depression and World War II. "We've cut back on some things." "What kind of things?" "Well," Grandma said slowly, "I've been skipping some of my doctor appointments." "And we switched to the cheaper medications. They don't work quite as well, but—" My vision went red. While I was learning to button my shirts with one hand, my brother had stolen my grandparents' medical money. While I was figuring out how to cut my food left-handed, they were cutting back on heart medication and diabetes treatments because of a lie Jake told using my name. "Did my parents know about this loan?" I asked. Another look passed between my grandparents. "Jake said they were aware," Grandpa said carefully. "Said it was a family decision." So my parents knew. They knew Jake had cleaned out my grandparents' savings account, and they'd said nothing. While I was invisible to them, my grandparents' suffering was apparently invisible too. I sat in that living room, surrounded by photos of military service and sacrifice, and realized that my family's capacity for cruelty went far deeper than just ignoring me. They'd weaponized my invisibility. They'd used the fact that no one expected to hear from me, that no one checked my opinion on things, that I was so absent from family decisions that they could literally speak for me without consequence. Jake had counted on me being invisible. My parents had counted on me staying invisible. They'd all counted on me never finding out. But invisible people have one advantage. They can see everything without being seen. And what I'd seen was enough. "Grandpa," I said, standing up, "I'm going to fix this." "Sarah, you don't need to get involved in family business." "This isn't family business," I said. "This is fraud, and I'm not invisible anymore." Because I was about to become very, very visible to the people who'd counted on me staying in the shadows. Some people need an army to go to war. I just needed a phone. The first call I made was to Tank. 6 a.m. Texas time. He picked up on the first ring like he was still on deployment, ready for anything. "Ma'am?" "Tank, I need your help." "Name it." No questions asked, no hesitation. That's the difference between blood family and chosen family. Blood family asks why. Chosen family asks when. I told him everything. Jake's fraud, my grandparents' stolen savings, my parents' silence. The way my family had used my invisibility as a weapon against the people I loved most. When I finished, Tank was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Ma'am, those people don't deserve to call themselves your family. But we're going to fix this. 3 hours later, Tank was standing in my grandparents' living room with 2 other soldiers I hadn't seen since Afghanistan. Chen, the intelligence officer who could find dirt on anyone, and Doc Williams, the medic who'd saved my life and had a psychology degree he never talked about. Looking at them standing in that small living room, still carrying themselves like the warriors they were, I felt something I hadn't experienced since coming home. I felt like I mattered. These men had driven hundreds of miles and taken time off work because I'd asked for help. No blood relation required. "All right, ma'am," Chen said, opening his laptop on my grandparents' kitchen table. "Let's see what Jake Mitchell has been up to." What Chen found in 30 minutes of typing would have taken me weeks to discover. Jake wasn't just a failed businessman. He was a pattern scammer. 3 previous investment opportunities that had folded mysteriously. 2 business partners who'd sued him for fraud. A credit score that looked like a phone number from the 1950s. "But here's the interesting part," Chen said, turning his screen toward me. "Look at the dates. Every one of Jake's previous scams had happened when I was deployed, when I was unreachable, when I was invisible to the family and couldn't contradict whatever story he was telling." "He's been using your deployments as cover," Doc said. "Every time you're overseas and can't defend yourself, Jake runs another con." Tank leaned back in his chair, jaw clenched. "So the question is, what are we going to do about it?" "We're going to make me visible," I said. "Very visible." The plan wasn't revenge. It was justice. But more than that, it was about making sure I could never be invisible again. To my family or to anyone else. "I'm going to start a foundation," I announced, "for veterans whose families have abandoned or exploited them." Doc nodded slowly. "Make it public. Media attention. Community involvement," Tank added. "Local businesses, veteran organizations, and we invite everyone," Chen said with a smile that told me he was already 3 steps ahead, "including your family. They can't refuse to support veterans publicly. Political suicide." We spent the next 2 weeks building something real, not a fake charity or a scheme. A legitimate foundation that would actually help people like me. Veterans who'd come home to find their families had moved on without them. Soldiers whose relatives had stolen their deployment savings. Service members whose sacrifices had been forgotten by the people who should have remembered them most. The Hall Foundation, named after my grandparents' real last name. Tank designed the website. Chen handled the legal paperwork. Doc reached out to other veterans who'd been exploited by their families. And me? I wrote a speech that would change everything. We booked the Veterans Memorial Hall in downtown Norfolk, sent press releases to local news stations, invited city council members, business leaders, and veteran organizations. The response was immediate and overwhelming. And then I sent personal invitations to my parents and Jake. "Local Veterans starts Foundation for Military Families," the invitation read. "Come support our community heroes and their families who sacrifice so much for our freedom." My father called me for the first time since I'd been home. "Sarah, I saw the invitation. This is wonderful. We're so proud of what you're doing." Proud. There was that word again. He was proud of me for doing something that made him look good publicly. "The whole family will be there," he continued. "Jake's excited to network with some of the business leaders. This could be great for his career." Of course, Jake was excited about networking opportunities. Of course, my family saw my foundation as a business opportunity rather than a mission to help people. "That's great, Dad," I said. "I can't wait for everyone to see what I've been working on." The night before the event, I sat in my small apartment with Tank, Chen, and Doc, going over final preparations. The speech was ready. The evidence was organized. The media would be there. "You sure about this, ma'am?" Tank asked. "Once you do this, there's no going back. Your family will never forgive you." I looked at these three men who'd dropped everything to help me seek justice for my grandparents, who'd worked for 2 weeks without pay to build something meaningful, who'd made me feel visible and valued and important. "Tank," I said, "my family already made their choice about me. They chose to make me invisible. Tomorrow, I'm choosing to be seen." Chen closed his laptop. "The beauty of this plan is that we're not attacking them. We're just telling the truth. In public. With witnesses." "Justice isn't about revenge," Doc added. "It's about making sure the right people get protected and the wrong people can't hurt anyone else." My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "So excited for tomorrow!" Invited some friends from the country club. "This will be such a nice addition to our family's reputation in the community." Our family's reputation. Even my foundation was about them, not me. I showed the text to my team. "Perfect," Tank said. "The bigger the audience, the better." Because tomorrow night, everyone in that room was going to see exactly who Sarah Mitchell really was, and who my family really was. There are moments in life when you can feel the whole world watching. This was one of them. The Veterans Memorial Hall was packed. 200 people filled every chair, with more standing along the walls. Local news cameras were set up in the back. The Norfolk Virginian Pilot had sent their best reporter. City council members sat in the front row, next to Gold Star families and Purple Heart recipients. And there, at table number 5, sat my family. My father wore his best Navy suit with an American flag pin on his lapel, the kind of patriotic costume he put on when he needed to look the part. My mother had chosen a conservative dress that screamed respectable military family, and Jake sat between them in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, already scanning the room for networking opportunities. They looked perfect. The ideal American family supporting their veteran daughter's charitable endeavor. I watched them from backstage as people filed in. My father was already working the room, shaking hands with business leaders and introducing himself as Sarah's proud father. My mother was chatting with the wives of city council members, no doubt mentioning how blessed they were to have a daughter who served her country. Jake had cornered a local real estate developer and was handing out business cards. Even at my own event, honoring my own service and the service of others, they were making it about them. Tank appeared beside me, adjusting his dress uniform. "You ready, ma'am?" I looked out at the crowd. Veterans from every conflict since Vietnam, military families who understood sacrifice, community leaders who genuinely cared about supporting those who'd served, and my family, who were here for the photo opportunities. "I'm ready." The program started with the Pledge of Allegiance. 200 voices spoke in unison, hands over hearts, eyes on the flag. In that moment, looking out at all those people who understood what service meant, I felt more visible than I ever had in my life. The mayor spoke first, talking about the importance of supporting veterans and their families. Then a Gold Star mother shared her story about losing her son in Iraq. By the time I was introduced, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. I stepped up to the podium and looked out at the audience. Tank, Chen, and Doc sat in the front row, dress blues immaculate, back straight, eyes locked on mine with the kind of unwavering support you only get from people who've seen you at your worst and still believe in you. My grandparents sat beside them, Grandpa in his old army dress uniform that still fit perfectly, Grandma holding his hand with tears already streaming down her face. And at table 5, My family smiled their camera-ready smiles, probably hoping I'd mention them specifically so they could get their names in the newspaper. "Good evening," I began. "Thank you all for being here tonight to support the Hall Foundation and our mission to help veterans and their families." Polite applause. I could see my father nodding approvingly, already imagining how good this would look on his social media. "When I started this foundation," I continued, "I thought about what it means to be invisible. Not invisible on the battlefield. Every soldier knows you never want to be invisible to your enemy. I'm talking about being invisible to the people who should see you most clearly." The room got quieter. This wasn't the feel-good speech they were expecting. I'm talking about veterans who come home from war to find that their families have moved on without them. Soldiers whose sacrifices are acknowledged with a quick "thank you for your service" before the conversation moves on to more comfortable topics. I could see confusion starting to creep across my parents' faces. This wasn't going according to their script. I'm talking about veterans whose own families treat them like they don't exist. Complete silence now. You could have heard a pin drop. The Hall Foundation exists because I know what it feels like to be invisible to your own family. I know what it's like to lose an arm serving your country and come home to find that your family is too busy celebrating your brother's promotion to notice that you're missing a limb. My mother's face went white. My father stopped smiling. Jake looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. I know what it's like to discover that while you were unconscious in a military hospital, someone in your family used your name and your military service to defraud your elderly grandparents out of their life savings. Gasps from the audience. The news cameras swung toward my family's table. My father started to stand up, but Tank caught his eye and shook his head slightly. Tank might have been sitting down, but he still looked like someone you wouldn't want to mess with. "I know what it's like to find out that your parents knew about this fraud and said nothing, because keeping family secrets was more important than protecting elderly veterans who'd already given everything to their country." The room erupted. Veterans started standing up, applauding. Someone shouted, "Tell the truth, Lieutenant." Others began calling out their own stories of family betrayal. But the most powerful moment came when my grandfather stood up. 86 years old, leaning heavily on his walker, wearing his World War II veteran cap that he'd earned storming the beaches of Normandy. "My granddaughter," he said in a voice that carried across the entire room, "has more honor in her little finger than some people have in their entire bodies." He turned to look directly at my parents' table. "Real family doesn't steal from each other. Real family doesn't use a soldier's name to commit fraud while that soldier is fighting for her country. And real family sure as hell doesn't stay silent when they know elderly veterans are being robbed." The standing ovation that followed lasted 5 minutes. 5 minutes of 200 people showing me that they saw me, they valued me, they understood what I'd been through. 5 minutes of being more visible than I'd ever been in my entire life. When the applause finally died down, I looked at table 5. My family sat frozen, faces red with embarrassment and anger. The news cameras were focused on them now, and everyone in the room was staring. My father leaned over to my mother and whispered something. They started gathering their things to leave. "Dad," I said into the microphone, my voice carrying across the silent room. "Leaving so soon?" He stopped, turned back toward the podium, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of being seen for who he really was. What happened next would prove that sometimes the truth is the most powerful weapon of all. 2 years later, I sat in my office overlooking Arlington National Cemetery. surrounded by letters from strangers who'd become family. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating rows upon rows of white headstones, silent testimony to the price of service. On my desk lay hundreds of letters from veterans across the country, each one starting the same way. I thought I was invisible too. The Hall Foundation had grown beyond anything I'd imagined that night at the Veterans Memorial Hall. We'd helped over 800 veterans who'd been abandoned or exploited by their families. We'd lobbied for and passed the Hall Family Protection Act, the first federal law specifically designed to protect military families from financial abuse by relatives. But the numbers only told part of the story. The real story was in the letters. "Dear Miss Hall," one began, "I saw your story on 60 Minutes last year. I'm a Marine corporal whose brother emptied my deployment savings while I was in Iraq. I thought I was the only one this had happened to. Your foundation helped me get my money back, and more importantly, helped me understand that I'm not invisible. I was just looking for visibility in the wrong places." Another, "Ms. Hall, I'm writing this from my new apartment, the first place I've lived where I don't have to prove I deserve to be here. My family used to only call when they needed money, then act like I was ungrateful when I said no. The Hall Foundation's counseling program taught me that love isn't supposed to hurt. Thank you for helping me see that." Tank walked into my office carrying his usual Monday morning coffee and stack of case files. He was our director of operations now, having left his Army career to build something that mattered more than rank or pension. "Morning, ma'am. Good news and better news. Which do you want first?" "Hit me with the good news. CNN wants to do a feature on military families for Veterans Day. They want you as the primary interview." "And the better news?" Tank grinned. "Jennifer Walsh just got promoted to Admiral. She's crediting the Hall Foundation's legal support for helping her fight off her family's lawsuit when she refused to co-sign their business loan." Admiral Jennifer Walsh, the Navy captain who'd written to me 3 years ago, saying my story had given her the courage to say no to her family's financial manipulation. The woman who'd named her daughter Sarah and sent me a photo of the little girl wearing a future Hall Foundation supporter onesie. My phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I hadn't seen in months. "It's my mother," I told Tank. He raised an eyebrow. "You want me to stay?" "No, I've got this." Tank left, closing the door behind him. I answered on the 4th ring. "Hi, Mom." Sarah. Her voice was smaller than I remembered. I saw the CNN announcement about the interview. "Yeah, it should air next month." A long pause. Are you going to talk about us again?" I leaned back in my chair, looking out at Arlington. "Mom, I've never talked about you. I've talked about what happened to me. There's a difference." "I know we hurt you," she said quietly. "I know we failed you. Your father and we've been in counseling, trying to understand how we got so lost." After the foundation event, my parents had moved to Florida. My father told everyone who would listen that I'd exaggerated the story for attention. Some people believed him. Most didn't. Local news had followed up on the story, confirming every detail. Jake had eventually been charged with elder fraud and served 6 months in county jail. "How's Dad?" I asked. "Angry. Still angry. He can't accept that he was wrong about anything. The counselor says he probably never will." She paused. "We separated last year." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I should have stood up for you years ago. I should have seen you." Her voice broke. "I should have been your mother instead of just Jake's mother." We talked for 20 minutes, not the surface-level conversation we'd had for most of my life, but something real, something honest. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. After I hung up, I opened my computer and started typing my weekly blog post for the Foundation website. If you're reading this and feeling invisible to your own family, I want you to know something. The problem isn't that you're hard to see. The problem is that you're looking for visibility from people who are determined to keep their eyes closed. Real family doesn't require you to prove your worth. Real family doesn't need evidence of your value. Real family sees you, automatically, completely, constantly, especially when you're at your worst. I spent 28 years trying to become visible to people who had decided I didn't matter. I lost an arm in Afghanistan and came home to find that my sacrifice wasn't enough to earn a place at their table. But I also found something better. I found the people who never needed me to prove anything. Tank, who dropped everything to help me seek justice. Chen, who used his skills to protect elderly veterans from fraud. Doc, who reminded me that healing isn't just physical. My grandparents, who saw me as valuable from the day I was born until the day they died. These people didn't share my DNA, but they shared something more important. They shared my values. If your current family can't see you, your real family is still out there. They're in coffee shops and community centers, in churches and veteran halls, in online forums and support groups. They're the coworker who checks on you when you're struggling, the neighbor who brings soup when you're sick, the stranger who becomes a friend because they recognize something in you that your relatives missed. You are not invisible. You're just in the wrong room. I posted the blog and closed my laptop. My phone immediately started buzzing with comments and messages from people across the country, veterans sharing their stories, families learning to do better, adult children setting boundaries with toxic relatives. But the message that meant the most came from Tank. Ma'am, you know what's funny? All those years your family couldn't see you, and now the whole country does. Turns out, you were never the problem. He was right. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was exactly where I belonged, surrounded by people who saw me clearly and loved me completely. And if you're feeling invisible to the people who should see you most clearly, know this: you deserve to be seen. You deserve to be valued. You deserve a family that shows up when it matters. Your real family is out there. Keep looking. If this story touched your heart, please share it. Not for me, but for the person in your life who feels invisible. The family member who's always overlooked. The friend who gives more than they receive. The colleague who quietly holds everything together. Leave a comment and tell me about someone who chose to be family to you. The person who saw you when others looked away. Who valued you when others took you for granted. Let's celebrate the people who choose love over obligation, who choose to see over choosing to ignore. And remember, your real family is out there. They might not share your blood, but they'll share your burdens. They might not have your last name, but they'll have your back. They might not be who you expected, but they'll be exactly who you need. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be valued. You deserve to matter. I'm Sarah Hall, and this is my story about finding the difference between relatives and family, between blood and love, between being invisible and being truly seen. Thank you for seeing me. Now go find the people who are waiting to see you too.